The reproductive system is the chapter we're looking into now, and we need to look at and compare and contrast the male versus female systems. What's similar, what's different, and what's the function of each system. But first of all, in general, what's the purpose, what's the function of the reproductive systems? And it doesn't matter if it's male or female here, this is the general purpose across everything. Well, first of all, producing sex cells, or the gametes. We're talking about producing the sperm and producing the egg. But also, the second function here is secretion of hormones. In the male system, I have down here androgens. Well, androgens, think testosterone. In the female system, we're looking at estrogen and progesterone as the primary ones. Now, it doesn't mean that in the female system there's no androgens. It doesn't mean in the male system there's no estrogen. But these are the primary productions of the actual sex hormones. Now, these hormones, doesn't matter if it's male or female again, in general, these sex hormones are going to help with development and functioning of the organs. So it's helping with the development of the testes, helping with the development of the ovaries, but also helping with any other associated tissues of the reproductive systems as well. You then have sexual behavior and drives. These hormones are what are basically controlling libido. They're controlling the urges one will feel. And you're looking at the bottom here, growth and development of other organs and tissues. Well, it's not just the ovary and testes that are being controlled and helped by these, but various other organs and tissues throughout the body are also having small roles from these hormones playing a part. So let's start with the male system and go through the anatomy to start with. Now, what's already labeled up here, you're seeing anus, rectum, peritoneum. We talked about that back in the digestive system. You're seeing ureter, urinary bladder. That was back in the urinary system we dealt with already. You're seeing pubis. That was back in AP1, back in the skeletal system. So everything that's already labeled, we've already pretty much gone through in previous units, in previous chapters. The new material starts off here. The testes and the scrotum. Testes and scrotum, as well as the epididymis, are going to be kept outside of the male body. Now, the reason they're outside is because optimal sperm production occurs a couple of degrees lower than body temperature. So you have the testes remaining outside the body, with the epididymis and the scrotum containing the whole entire system. But then we start to head into the body. That's the ductus deferens or the vas deferens. This tube that's leading up, that's going to be carrying the sperm up into the actual body itself to go through the rest of the process and go through the rest of development. You're going to have the seminal vesicle, the ampulla of the vas deferens. Now, this actual ductwork there, that is the seminal vesicle. It's going to secrete a fluid to mix with the sperm and basically creating semen. The ampulla of the ductus deferens is just the end of the ductus deferens, or the vas deferens, and where the two are combining. Now, both the ductus deferens and the seminal vesicle combine right inside the prostate. Now, you can see the prostate is this structure right here. The prostate, as we mentioned back in the urinary system, is sitting just inferior to the urinary bladder. But you'll notice that you have two different ducts coming together from the seminal vesicles and the vas deferens coming together and joining. Where they join is called the ejaculatory duct. Now that's inside of the prostate. We then have the prostatic urethra. This tube coming down right from the urinary bladder going through the prostate is referred to as the prostatic urethra. Now, we've talked about the urethra as in carrying urine from the urinary bladder out of the body, but it doubles its purpose in the reproductive system because it also will carry the semen out of the body as well. But the portion of it that's found inside the prostate is called the prostatic urethra. The next region of the urethra is called the membranous urethra. And that's just this little section right there that's going through the actual membrane. So there's two regions so far. We then have this bulbourethral gland. that's this piece right here. It's going to connect into the urethra just after the membranous urethra region. Now, the bulbourethral gland is going to secrete a clear fluid before the semen is secreted. The idea here is it's meant to kind of clean out the urethra from any remnants of urine. You then have the spongy urethra. The spongy urethra is what's traveling actually through the penis right here. That's the spongy urethra. So in total, there are 3 different regions of the urethra in the male system. We have the prostatic urethra, we have the membranous urethra, and then we have the spongy urethra. Now, around that spongy urethra, we're going to start with the bulb of the penis. That's this area down here. That's kind of around the actual urethra. And then, there we go. We go to the corpus cavernosum and the corpus spongiosum. Now, those two are erectile tissues. In this image, they're shown in the blue. You're going to have the corpus cavernosum as the portion up here. That is going to fill up with blood, and that's what creates an erection. But if that fills up with blood, that could compress the urethra. So the actual corpus spongiosum is this portion on both sides of the urethra. It forms a ring around the urethra. It also fills up with blood and engorges. Its purpose to help with the erection, but also protect the urethra and allow the urethra to remain open, so it doesn't get pinched closed by the erectile tissue. We then have the glans penis, which basically is the end of the penis, or the head of the penis. At that point, you can also have the external urethral orifice. That's the opening to the urethra. That's where urine and semen both will exit the body. Now, I mentioned that the scrotum is serving the purpose of keeping the testes a couple degrees lower than body temperature. Ideally, it's kept about 3 degrees Celsius lower than body temperature. Now, that will vary because obviously external temperature and body temperature also varies. So the body has mechanisms to help regulate the temperature of the actual testes. There are what's known as the dartos muscle. The dartos muscle is going to allow for the actual scrotum to kind of wrinkle and compress. That's helping to pull the testes together to make a smaller space, conserving heat basically. But you also have a secondary muscle, which is the cremaster muscle. Now the cremaster muscle is going to be a skeletal muscle that helps to elevate or depress the testes. The idea is if the environment is cold, the testes are pulled towards the body to maintain that 3-degree difference. But if the environment is hot and the body temperature is warm, the cremaster muscle relaxes and the testes depress, allowing for it to get further away from the body to try and maintain the 3 degrees Celsius difference. So both the dartos and cremaster muscles work together to try and keep the testes about 3 degrees Celsius lower than body temperature. So now here is an anterior view, and we'll have a little better idea of how the testes are actually formed and structurally built. So first off, you have the scrotum itself. That's the external around the outside. Now the skin is there, but then you also have this superficial fascia where you have the dartos muscle. That's again causes the actual wrinkling of the fascia. Then we have the external spermatic fascia, so the next layer in. So we're going layer by layer here. You then have the cremaster muscle. Now on this side, you're seeing the cremaster muscle. That's what's running up and heading into the actual body. But on this side, we have a deeper cutaway. So you're not seeing the whole cremaster muscle cover the testes. Instead, it's only being a cutaway layering. So the cremaster muscle here is only this outside layering on the edge. But then if we go a layer deeper than that, we come down to where the epididymis is. That's this structure right there. It's mostly going posterior behind the testes. So you're not seeing a whole lot of it. But you have the tunica vaginalis and the tunica albuginea. Those are two different layers that are around the testes, but deep to the cremaster muscle. You're going to notice that this layering right here is the tunica vaginalis. It's on the outside. But this white you're seeing covering right here, that's the tunica albuginea. So it's the deeper of the two tunics. We then have various different structures heading up and down from the testes into the body down to the testes. We're going to have the testicular artery that's carrying blood down to the testes. So you're providing gases, you're providing nutrients, providing the building blocks. You have obviously the ductus deferens, or the vas deferens, either name's fine. That's what carries the actual sperm from the testes up out of the system. You have the autonomic nerve fibers, helping with control and feedback mechanisms. You have the pampiform venous plexus. That is taking the blood from the testes and heading back into the body. So all of these together, they're all grouped together inside of what's known as the spermatic cord. So all of that, this whole entire thing here, is known as the spermatic cord. So it's all of the structures inside there is going to be the spermatic cord. Now, we've already mentioned that the tunica vaginalis and the tunica albuginea are wrapping around the testes. The tunica vaginalis actually comes from the peritoneum. So it's derived from there. It's not part of it anymore, but during development, that's where it actually came from. So remember, the peritoneum was the membrane that goes around the digestive system, all the digestive organs. So during development of the testes, there was a portion of that membrane that was pulled down to create this layering. The other one, the tunica albuginea, is a fibrous capsule. Think more protective coating around the outside. So two different layerings, both around the actual testes itself. Now, inside the testes, you're going to have these different septa or septum. They're dividing the testes. It's dividing the insides into, amazingly, 250 to 300 different lobes. So a lot of very small divisions occurring here. Now, each lobe is going to contain between 1 and 4 of these seminiferous tubules. The seminiferous tubules are the actual sites of sperm production. That's where they're made. That's where the stem cells are that will produce the actual sperm. So that's what we're looking at. Now, we've seen this histology all the way back in the endocrine system when we're talking about production of testosterone, but we weren't focusing on this portion at that time. So here is a cut-through view of the testes. What you're seeing already, this entire thing right here, is the testes. Everything back here, that is going to be the epididymis. So that's more on the posterior aspect. So what you're going to see, first off, are all the seminiferous tubules. Each one of these is going to be a seminiferous tubule. So all those are the seminiferous tubules. You can see how they're separated into lobes. Each one of these is a single lobe. Now those lobes are divided by the septa we mentioned, but every one of those lobes, every one of those seminiferous tubules is going to go back to what's called a straight tubule. The straight tubule is this back portion at the end of each one. It feeds into what's known as the rete teste. That's this structure. Now the rete teste is just where all these seminiferous tubules feed into. It's kind of like a collection point. It's the junction just before you go into the epididymis. So you're going into the efferent ductule, into the ducts of the epididymis. So all of these are all ducts of the epididymis. Now the epididymis itself has different regions. You have the head region up here, kind of the starting point. You have the main body, which is down here. And then you have the tail of the epididymis, which is the end, kind of like the tail at the end there. And all of that is going to be heading up into the body after it leaves the epididymis, heading up via the ductus deferens, or known as the vas deferens. And that heads up into the body to continue the process after that. Spermatic cord, remember, contains everything, and that's what goes up into the body or comes out if it's looking at the artery or the nerves. Histologically looking at this, we are seeing one single seminiferous tubule. This whole entire thing is one single seminiferous tubule. What you're noticing, you actually see the tails of all the sperm heading in here. Now, I'll have to come back to this and look at that more later. But remember, this is where the sperm is actually produced. That's the site of production. The actual site of testosterone production was what was in between the seminiferous tubules, remember. So that's a whole different thing we'll talk about there. All right, epididymis. We've already mentioned the epididymis has the head, it has the body, it has the tail. It's what collects the sperm from the testes. But what's interesting is, in those ducts, they're filled with microvilli. The microvilli are absorbing the testicular fluid. Because to allow these sperm to move, they're in a fluid. But that testicular fluid needs to be absorbed because it's not needed anymore. It's already done its job, it's done its purpose. So therefore, it absorbs all this testicular fluid, and these microvilli can give nutrients to the sperm to keep them alive. The sperm enter as non-motile. That means they can't move on their own. They're not able to swim, they're not able to move their flagella, they cannot move yet. But as they pass through, they become motile by the time they're leaving the epididymis. That means they're able to move on their own. So one of the big purposes of the epididymis, besides collecting the sperm and passing them on to the body, is to create the motility of the sperm. So a little about how the male system is structurally built, and a little about how the testes and epididymis are working.